Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at a pretty influential and controversial book.
Yeah,
It's The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli.
definitely a classic.
Oh, yeah. This book has been keeping people thinking and arguing for centuries, and you'll see why pretty quickly.
For sure.
We'll be using an episode of the Retro Rewind podcast called Mastering Power. Machiavelli's The Prince Unpacked as our guide for this.
Sounds good.
So get ready to go back in time to Renaissance Italy with us.
Back in time.
We'll explore ideas about power from like boardrooms all the way to battlefields.
It's pretty amazing how relevant a book written over 500 years ago can still be.
Right?
Like, Machiavelli was writing when things were really chaotic in Italy.
Ah.
The Medici family was trying to take control of Florence,
Wow.
and Machiavelli himself got kicked out of Florence.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine what a crazy world he was living in.
Yeah, I bet that experience definitely shaped his views on power.
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like he had a front row seat to some intense power struggle.
Haha.
Yeah. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
what was he really trying to do with the prince? Was it like a practical guide, a theoretical thing, or something else?
You know, The Prince almost reads like a handbook for rulers.
Really?
It's full of advice on how to get power and hold on to it.
Interesting.
What sets it apart from other political writing of the time is its focus on realpolitik.
That's a term we'll need to unpack later.
Yeah, definitely.
But basically, is it saying that a ruler shouldn't really be worried about being moral? They should just focus on what works.
Yeah, essentially, even if it means bending the rules or, putting morals aside.
That's pretty wild for a time when everyone thought about politics in terms of like virtue and morality.
I know, right?
I can see why this book got people talking. It's pretty scandalous. So how did Machiavelli deal with this pragmatic approach, like with the traditional ideas of leadership at the time?
He didn't really.
Oh.
He actually went right at those traditional ideas. One of his most famous quotes, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." Like, perfectly shows how he breaks away from all that idealistic philosophy stuff.
That's kind of scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems to say that fear is the best way to stay in control.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's like cynical about people, or is there some truth to it?
Well, Machiavelli wasn't necessarily saying to be a tyrant.
Okay,
He thought a good ruler would ideally want both fear and love.
I see.
But if you could only pick one, he thought fear was the more dependable choice.
Why is that?
Well, love can be pretty unpredictable, It depends on what people want. But fear is based on something real, like the threat of punishment.
Oh, so it's more about consequences. Choosing stability over being popular, even if it makes you look ruthless.
Exactly.
Wow.
For Machiavelli, the ends justified the means, especially when it came to keeping things stable and reaching political goals.
Okay.
Which takes us to another key concept in The Prince.
Virtue.
So virtue with a V, that's not the same as like regular virtue. Right, it's different.
Okay.
Think of it more as a set of skills and qualities that let a leader control their own fate and, roll with the punches in the world of politics.
I see.
It's about being decisive, smart, and, yeah, even ruthless sometimes.
This sounds like a totally different kind of leader than those wise and kind rulers we usually picture.
Yeah.
Are there any modern examples of people who embody this Machiavellian virtue?
Let me think.
Okay.
Someone like Napoleon Bonaparte comes to mind.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to make tough choices, even if people didn't like them.
Right.
He was always changing up his plans, switching sides and doing whatever it took to get more power.
Wow.
It's probably no coincidence that he was a big fan of Machiavelli's work.
Napoleon, the Machiavellian strategist.
Yeah, pretty much.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But wasn't Machiavelli mostly talking about politics?
Right.
Does The Prince have any relevance outside of that? Like, could you use these ideas in business or even just, like, relationships?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The ideas in The Prince have had a big impact way beyond politics.
Really?
Like, you see them everywhere, from businesses to, even movies.
So you're saying the Machiavellian type, the super cunning person who does whatever it takes to win, is still around today?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
And it's not always a bad thing.
Okay.
Think about it. Don't successful entrepreneurs often have a bit of that Machiavellian spirit?
I guess that.
They have to be willing to take risks, make hard decisions, and sometimes play rough to get ahead.
So are you saying we should all embrace our inner Machiavelli to succeed in life?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It's not about becoming like a heartless manipulator,
I see.
but understanding how power works, how to get it, use it, and how people use it to their advantage can be really helpful in any area of life.
So it's more about knowing how these power dynamics work and using that to your advantage rather than just blindly following Machiavelli's playbook.
Exactly. The Prince gives you a way to understand how power works, but it's up to you to decide how you want to use that knowledge. Like,
Right.
do you want to be a nice leader, a tough negotiator, or something in between?
Right.
The Prince doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you a powerful way to look at your choices.
That's a really insightful way to look at it.
Thanks.
It sounds like Machiavelli wasn't trying to give us rules, but more like tools to understand the world.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty cool.
And even though some of his advice might seem harsh or even wrong, you can't deny that what he noticed about people and how power works was really sharp
Yeah.
for still relevant today.
Definitely.
It's incredible.
We've only just started to look at the Prince, but I already feel like I'm seeing things differently.
It really makes you think.
And I bet our listeners are ready to hear more.
Bet they are.
But before we go too deep, let's take a second to unpack one of Machiavelli's most famous ideas.
Okay, which one?
The idea of realpolitik.
Oh, good choice.
I think it's time we define that.
Yeah, definitely.
That concept is really central to what makes the Prince so different and controversial, you know?
It is.
It makes us question what we think about morality and leadership.
Right.
And it forces us to look at the realities of power in a way that few other books do.
Absolutely. It's a powerful book.
I'm really interested to hear more about this.
Yeah, me too.
It's really fascinating
So
stuff.
sure.
Okay, so we're back and ready to get deeper into Machiavelli's world.
Let's do it.
Right before we took that little break, we were about to tackle that term, realpolitik.
Yeah.
It seems like it was made from Machiavelli's ideas.
Absolutely. It's really key to understanding. The Prince,
Okay.
Machiavelli didn't shy away from like the tough stuff about power.
Right.
He believed that a ruler shouldn't be held back by, traditional morality. They should focus on what gets results, even if it means making tough choices.
Even if those choices are a little, well, unsavory.
Yeah, even then.
Okay, so realpolitik is about putting practicality and results above, like idealistic principles. Is that what makes Machiavelli different from other thinkers back then?
Exactly. While others were focused on how rulers should act, Machiavelli looked at how they actually act.
Okay.
In the real world of politics, it can get messy.
Right, it's not always pretty.
He argued that morality, while important in your personal life, can sometimes be a problem in, running a state.
It's kind of a hard pill to swallow, separating ethics from leadership.
Yeah.
But I guess in a world where everyone's always fighting for power, it makes sense that a ruler would want to survive and keep things stable above everything else.
Right, it's about priorities.
So can you give us like a real world example of realpolitik in action, maybe something from history or even what's going on today?
Well, think about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Both Kennedy and Khrushchev had to make incredibly tough calls.
Definitely.
They were navigating a nuclear standoff that could have ended really badly. Their choices were all about strategy, weighing risks and outcomes.
Not really about abstract morals.
Exactly. Realpolitik at its most extreme.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it was a tense time.
Okay, but Machiavelli wasn't all doom and gloom, right?
No, not at all.
He also talked about a ruler's character and their ability to adapt.
You're talking about virtue, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're spot on. It's a crucial idea in The Prince.
Okay.
Machiavelli believed that a ruler needs more than just power.
What else?
They need skill, smarts, and the ability to, change with the times in the world of politics.
Adapt to the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it as being able to grab opportunities, overcome obstacles, and basically create your own destiny.
So it's not just about being strong or ruthless, but also being clever and resourceful.
Yeah.
Is that what he meant with that whole lion and fox thing?
You got it. That's one of his most famous analogies.
Okay, remind me about that one.
So the lion represents strength, courage, commanding respect through force.
Right.
But the fox, that's cunning, deception, strategic thinking.
Interesting.
Machiavelli thought a good ruler needs to be both.
Like switch back and forth.
Yeah, knowing when to roar like a lion and when to be sneaky like a fox.
That's a really strong image.
It is, right?
It gets right to the core of how Machiavelli thought about leadership.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just have power. You also need to be smart and able to adapt.
always adjusting to the situation.
Exactly. And we see this lion and fox idea even today.
All the time.
Like, we admire leaders who are strong, but also strategic.
Those who can command attention, but also outsmart their opponents.
It's almost like a dance, finding the right balance between force and, well, finesse.
I like that, yeah.
This brings up an interesting question for me, though.
What's that?
If Machiavelli was writing The Prince today, who would his ideal prince be?
Ooh, good question.
Would it be a politician, a tech CEO, or maybe even like a social media influencer?
That's fun to think about, right?
Yeah.
I think he'd be just as interested in how power works now as he was back then.
I bet.
He might be really into someone like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Musk seems to have both the lion and fox in him, especially in his business stuff and how he innovates.
That's true.
Or maybe Machiavelli would be studying how social media influencers use their influence.
Yeah, it's a different kind of power.
They shape public opinion and build like online empires.
It's amazing how these ideas from centuries ago still apply in so many ways.
It really is.
But let's bring it back to our listeners for a sec.
Okay.
What can someone who's not, running a country or a big company learn from the prince?
Good question.
Is there anything in there for the average person?
Absolutely. Even though the prince might seem like it's just for rulers,
Yeah.
it actually has a lot to say about human nature and power dynamics.
Okay.
That stuff applies to any situation where you need to influence people or persuade them.
Right.
Think about your work, your community, even your relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Understanding how power works in those situations can make you a better leader, negotiator, and communicator, basically in every part of your life.
So even if we're not trying to take over a city-state, there are still Machiavellian things we can learn.
Exactly. The Prince gives you a bunch of strategies for understanding why people do what they do, how to build alliances, and reach your goals.
Sounds useful.
It is, but it's important to remember that Machiavelli was just describing how power works, not saying what's right or wrong.
Oh, that's important.
It's up to each of us to decide how we want to use that knowledge.
So it's more like a mirror than a map.
Yeah, I like that.
It shows us the complicated parts of human nature.
The good and the bad.
And those sometimes uncomfortable truths about how power really works.
That's what makes it such a valuable read, even all these years later.
It makes us question our own beliefs about power and leadership.
And how we handle those tough ethical choices that pop up when we go after what we want.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
We've covered a lot, from the history behind the prince to how it's still relevant today.
Yeah, we've been all over the place.
But I think it's time to shift gears a bit and look at something in Machiavelli's work that often gets overlooked.
You thinking about the role of fortune?
That's exactly it.
Yeah, that adds another layer to the prince.
It seems like even the smartest strategist can't always control what happens.
Nope. Sometimes luck plays a big part.
So how did Machiavelli think about this unpredictability? Did he have any ideas on how to deal with bad luck or make the most of good luck?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in our last section.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is.
I'm ready to hear more.
Let's dive in.
And we're back for our final look at Machiavelli's The Prince. Before, we were talking about how Machiavelli saw the role of fortune, like luck and how power plays out. It seems like even the most clever prince can't control every little thing that happens.
True. Even Machiavelli knew that fortune had a big impact on everything people do. He even compared it to a wild river. Like, it can wash away even the most careful plans.
So how did he think people should deal with that? Did you have any strategies for, minimizing bad luck or using good luck to your advantage?
Machiavelli thought that even though you can't control fortune, you can get ready for it. He used that river analogy again, saying a smart prince would think about floods and build dams and levees to prepare, hoping for the best but ready for the worst.
I like that. It's like being proactive, not just waiting for stuff to happen and then reacting. So is this where virtue comes in again?
Exactly. Machiavelli believed that virtue was how you navigate the unpredictable stuff that fortune throws at you. A prince with virtue can change with the situation, grab chances when they pop up, and even, to a point, bend fortune to their will.
So it's not just strength or cleverness. It's also about being flexible and tough enough to get through those rough patches. That seems like good advice for anyone, not just someone trying to rule.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with problems at work, in your personal life, or just with everyday ups and downs. Having that Machiavellian virtue can make all the difference.
It sounds like Machiavelli, even though he had this reputation for being ruthless, had a pretty complex view of what people could actually do. We're not just, like, helpless pieces in the game of fortune. We can affect what happens to us, even when things are out of our control.
That's a great way to put it. Machiavelli knew there were limits to what people could control, but he also thought taking action was really important. He thought that fortune favors those who are bold, the ones who take risks and seize the moment.
This has been such a fascinating dive into Machiavelli's work. We've talked about so much, from the crazy politics of Renaissance Italy to how his ideas are still relevant today. But before we wrap up, I got to ask you one last thing. If you had to sum up Machiavelli's wisdom into one piece of advice for our listeners, what would it be?
That's a tough one. But I think he'd say something like, see the world for what it really is, not how you want it to be. Be ready to change, make those tough calls, and grab onto opportunities when fortune's on your side. And never underestimate what you can do, even when you're facing huge obstacles.
Wow, that's powerful. I think that really captures what Machiavelli was all about. He pushed us to look at the world realistically, to be ready for both the good and bad that comes with power, and to never give up on shaping our own lives.
Perfectly said. And on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye to Machiavelli and his world.
But before we go, we want to hear from you. Have you read The Prince? What do you think about Machiavelli's ideas? Are they smart, disturbing, or maybe both? Head over to our website or social media and let us know. We always love a good discussion, even if it gets a little Machiavellian.
Agreed. And until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and maybe keep a copy of The Prince around, just in case you need a little inspiration for your strategy.
You never know when you might need to unleash your inner lion or fox. Thanks for listening.